Caroline Buchanan, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Usually I'd get people to kind of introduce themselves, but I don't think there'd be that many people that don't know who you are in the biking industry.
Well, if you don't, it's been a little while since we've been racing between tape with everything going on in the world. But yeah, my full-time job is normally a professional BMX racer and mountain biker. So I've always dabbled between the two sports over the last 15 years, and it's kept me pretty occupied. So between 2 Olympic Games and then 8 world titles between BMX and mountain biking, I've sort of had my fair share of many different wheel sizes and cycling disciplines.
Are you the only person to be, other than maybe Jared Graves, possibly, are you the only one that mixes it up between the two so consistently? I
think, looking back, Jared Graves did it for a few years. I'd say longer term, I'm probably the only crazy one that's sort of stuck it out for the last 12 years. And then in terms of like cycling disciplines, there is a few like track, road kind of crossover athletes as well. But no, normally it's, your specialist athletes.
Yeah. I guess like track and road, the differences aren't that huge. But when you look at like mountain bike racing, the skill sets and the power outputs in your training is completely different to BMX, right? I mean, there is some crossover, but it is a bit different.
Some crossover. I mean, I've always found it harder to be on the mountain bike. I get so comfortable on that, and to always jump back on the BMX, it feels like that little midget bike. It's so like super twitchy, super responsive, and I've always felt really uncomfortable going back. So BMX to mountain bike's been an easy transition, mountain bike back to BMX. So sometimes I've had to kind of strategically look at the calendar and go like, if I'm at Steelder and then a few weeks later I'm back at a World Cup for BMX, I know that I need to like have that check-in on a big track because I'm probably going to be sketchy that first day. So yeah, but that's sort of been a little bit juggling that I've sort of had to do.
Yeah, I ride with a bunch of kind of ex-pro / getting older BMXers, and they have all got into mountain bikes, and they found that transition to mountain bikes kind of hard because they didn't realize they could just run over stuff, right? And then when they hop back on their BMX, they're like, how did we even ever ride these things? It's a whole other transition, right?
It's completely different. I think for me, I was pretty fortunate. How I got into mountain biking was I actually lost a bet with a friend. So going back to when I was 15 years old, so started BMX at 5, didn't get into mountain biking till 15. It was a bet. He either had to come to a BMX race if he lost, or if I lost, I had to go to a mountain bike event. So yeah, I lost a bet and went to my local Canberra. It was a cork. It was like a mini downhill event that I could basically do on his borrowed trail bike. So started off on a trail bike, did like a local downhill event, and from there I was wrapped and pretty hooked. So I kind of look back and think like, man, if I'd got into it earlier, like even better. But it was that natural transition, and got more hooked on the downhill initially before I realized there was all these other mountain bike disciplines that I was more suited to.
But you said you started racing at 5 on BMX, or riding BMX at 5, and then mountain biking at 15. You really can't get much earlier than that. Like, it's pretty damn early. These days, I guess you've got all those brands like Common Style, and they're making like tiny mountain bikes. So, and even like looking around the world, the freestyle women's movement, there's some like little 11 and 12-year-old girls like jumping through some mini free ride slope courses, and that just didn't exist when I was growing up. So, probably looking back then, I probably couldn't have got into it any earlier, but, I wish that I did. Yeah. How did you get into racing at 5? Was it something you kind of wanted to do, I guess, or was it something your family was doing at the time?
Well, it's pretty natural. Like most girls in action sport, they have that older brother. So for me, my older brother, Sam, he started racing, and we literally just drove past the local Canberra BMX track in Canberra and went to a local race day. So my dad raced, my brother raced, and I raced. And I was pretty hooked. Like I was doing taekwondo and a few other sports at the time. Yeah. But I was sort of really drawn to that success is on you, that failure is on you. And I was doing some team sports at the time, and I really just loved that individual aspect, and I loved like that challenge. So It wasn't that, consistent white lines that you were doing in swimming or tennis and all these other things. So, yeah, from there, I just followed in my brother's footsteps. He had a big accident when I would have been 13. So he broke his neck and didn't continue with the sport. But, yeah, he's healthy now. So I stuck in it for the family.
Good to hear, because it seems like a common injury in that BMX scene is just like a neck injury seem way over. Like they're just everywhere. It's
weird, isn't it? I mean, we obviously had Brooke McDonald in mountain biking recently. But looking at BMX, we've had between a small, tight-knit BMX Olympic team of Australia, we had Sam Willoughby. Obviously, he was paralysed. And then more recently, we had Kai Sakakibara, who had a coma and, been battling that. So I think, it's obviously something that's quite scary, but you can't really
put it out of the back of the mind. Yeah, just keep going.
I mean, I injured myself 2.5 years ago now in an off-road vehicle accident. So it didn't even happen on a bike. And I know that the injuries that I sustained there, I couldn't even withstand those forces on a bike. So it kind of gives me the confidence to, continue with my career.
It didn't kill you. It makes you stronger, right?
Yeah. I had to confirm that with the doctors. I was like, could I do this on a bike? They're like, no. And I'm like, done, sign me up.
Sweet. We'll talk a bit more about those injuries later. But at what point were you successful straight off the bat? And at what point did you kind of want to pursue it as a career or as a sport?
For BMX, I started state, then national. I went to international when I was actually 9. So I went to the first World Championships over in Paris, met my dad's family. But it wasn't really until 14 that you start in that pro category, start earning some pocket money from $200 wins and things in BMX. So that sort of gave me that itch. But I would say my first Olympic Games, I was 18 years old in 2012. At that time, my highest sponsor was paying me $7,000 as a bike brand. And I was still sort of supported by mum and dad. So at that point, I was already a 4-time world champ, 12-time national champion. I'd been dabbling in both sports, but it still wasn't something that I could say I'm a professional athlete. So it really snowballed from, I'd say, that first 2012 London Olympics to then go on. That was really when my career picked up. So it's almost like any business. You've almost got to put in that first 5 years work of your professional career, knowing you're not really going to make much money out of it, and you're going to have to take all those product deals, and you're not going to have those salaries and endorsements straight away. And then it really built and snowballed from there.
Did you ever look at people living the, I guess, air quotes, normal life and kind of get envious, or were you ever kind of attracted to that kind of stability?
Stability, definitely. Being a female in sort of male-dominated sports, you crunch the numbers quite early and you know the challenge you're going to be in for back then. Whereas now it's completely different. You're almost, I feel, better off being a female in male-dominated sports. Now that the worlds of social media and more brands are really influenced by that female market. So yeah, back then I'd say I sort of crunched the numbers and just knew that I had to hook in and hustle and build not only the sport of BMX, so employed media liaisons to help grow basically the profile of BMX in Australia. So if I was overseas and competed in a World Cup, she would package the content. She would have it at Fox Sport by Monday, and things like that really helped grow, I guess, not only the sport, but the perception of the sport. And from there, then the money and endorsements came back in. So it took a team initially to really sort of help that in Australia. And then obviously now it's grown to Crankworks and more of mountain bike disciplines, which have had that growth from back in the day when I just raced four cross.
Yeah, right. So you had enough initiative to kind of realize that you needed some help and needed those crew that were pro at that to help you. That's pretty insane.
Yeah, my dad was in marketing and ran his own business, and so he's kind of okay, well, when I was going to my first Olympics and there's only 7,000 from a bike brand and knowing there's not other deals coming in, he's like, we really need to take this professionally. We need to build your brand. and go from there. So had a bit of his marketing advice and then mentors from there. And really I just got hooked to that hustle, you could say, and really grew from there. So, yeah, Dad was a big influence.
Because you're definitely one of the earlier, from what I can think of, the earlier people kind of promoting yourself like that and going down that route, and you kind of pioneered that route, would you say? Or was there anyone around you kind of mimicked?
It was a little awkward, I think, in the beginning. Like, I definitely copped some slack. I remember from the boys and different brands being like, or even Cycling Australia, like, you don't need to have your own website because we've got your profile on our website. And I'm like, it can sit there, but I'm going to have mine on mine too. So there was a little bit of that initial, like, why are you doing this? Why, like, over promotion? But then it came back tenfold to them, those brands coming back and be like, we want to work with you. How do you do this? Why? Can you start doing podcasting? Can you do like how-tos? And so, yeah, I'd say initially it was a little bit daunting, but then it obviously grew. And now if you don't do it, then you're behind the 8 ball and you're never going to be that professional athlete, because I'd say it's more than 50-50 now, your results off the track versus what you do on.
I was going to ask, how do you go about balancing that? Because you obviously got to train and perform and be good at your sport, but then also be marketable, which not every guy that's good at, or every person that's good at their sport is marketable. So it's kind of hard to see that balance.
Yeah, well, the last 5 years I haven't had any podium contingencies. Nothing's been around my performance on a bike. So that's the level that I wanted to be at. It was one of my goals to sort of really build like a team, some really strong relationships with brands like Oakley that I've been with for 15 years now, with Maxis that it's been 10 years. And then knowing what they want as well. So you ask their marketing objectives and you collaboratively come together. And so much now is more about influencing the next generation of whether it's girls to get into the sport or whether it's just the love of bikes. So if you can sell the love of riding bikes, and it's not necessarily about that podium win, that's kind of the brands that I've aligned with and that have really excelled with me to keep things fun and do signature donut gloves and donut undies with fist and knobby and like Boost Mobile and, you know, ride Harley Davidsons around the world and partner with Mercedes-Benz and Nutrigrain boxes. So it's just sort of really spread and been really fun and motivating at the same time. So I've had just as much enjoyment out of that as I have from, you know, those podiums I've stood on too.
Did you ever think that you'd get to that position where you would be working for brands like that and have your own signature stuff?
It was a goal. I think you've got to obviously manifest it. So when I was younger, me and my dad even, like, we looked at cereal boxes with swimmers on it, and it was like, one day there'll be a cyclist on there. Like, you'll walk down Woolworths and Coles and like you'll see a face. And I sort of wanted that to be me. And it came around all these years later after multiple injuries and adversity for me that Nutrigrain had an unstoppable project, and they said, you know, you tick our pillars of strength, courage, determination. You've had a massive setback, and, you know, we want to help you align to inspire obviously more kids out there. So yeah, ticked all those boxes, and all these years later it came back around.
That's amazing. It's so good to see like someone achieving their goals and really setting out to do it. How, if we wind it back a bit, how did it feel getting your first kind of world title, and how was the process of getting there for that?
Yeah, so 11 years ago, I actually had a friend message me a photo. Stromlo Forest Park in Canberra, so it was the 4-cross event out there. Tens of thousands of people like at the venue and across the weekend. I had so much hype. It was still to this day one of those like fairy tale moments. You'll never, I think, be able to experience that first world title rush. Coming into that race, I'd crashed over in Andorra. There was like a 4-cross World Cup prior and tore some discs in my back, and I actually hadn't been on the bike for 4 months. So I recovered from that, and that was my first event back. And lining up on that start gate against Jill Kittner and Melissa Buell and all these like idols of mine, I was that little young underdog. I was 17 years old, and I just remember crossing the line, winning that world title, and like my hairdresser and my butcher and all these like local people were all there, and I was like, this is so surreal. And then from there it basically just went on to more world championships for four cross, and that was like a natural progression sort of away from downhill. I did downhill as a junior at the same time, raced in Val de Sol, hated the routes, came down crying. Like I was like, this is not for me. Like this is gnarly. And really found that sort of niche of more of the slalom, the pump track, the air downhill, and now speed and style, which has just sort of been more of this crankworks progression in mountain biking. So sort of where it's come from.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's crazy. What was four cross like at the time as well? Because it did kind of go more into that BMX-y style stuff at the end, but like at the time it was still kind of mountain biking. Was it a hard transition going from BMX to racing that kind of rougher stuff?
A little bit. I had to obviously like loosen up and learn to ride rocks, but I was still such a BMXer. Like I ran my tire pressures too hard and I knew it. Like I really focused on getting out of the gate and then just making myself wide down the course for no one to pass me.
Yep.
That was sort of like how I started in four cross, but racing downhill as a junior and going to Val de Sol, going to Peter Maritzburg, getting a fifth at that world champs against the elite girls, that really helped me transition my mountain bike skills. So I'd say it was in those like sort of first 3 years as being a junior, which laid that foundation to learn to corner, to learn how to handle a mountain bike. And as you said, like just to be comfortable going over rocks and knowing what the bikes can do. The BMX bikes can't handle too much and can't even really handle a case at the end of the day. You know, you're generally over the bars or head first into a concrete turn. So, yeah, the mountain bikes are much more forgiving.
Oh, for sure. Is that a blessing or a curse, though? Because sometimes people get a little bit overambitious.
Well, I knocked myself out 3 weeks ago, had a bit of a concussion at Stromlo. But that was on a mountain bike, so you just never know. You know, you obviously have your injuries and you have to pay to play sometimes.
Oh, exactly. You got to pay those taxes. What was it about downhill that didn't quite attract you to going down that route?
I found that as an athlete, like the sport at that time was very much directed towards downhill. It was like, with the likes of SRAM, the Common Styles and brands that I was riding for at the time, they're like, you need to be a downhill World Cup athlete. And I'm like, I don't want to be a downhill World Cup athlete.
Yeah.
The reason I think was that level you have to ride on the edge. And I've always been a little bit more like a predictable athlete. I've always in BMX waited for another girl to jump that triple in the wind first, calculate it, and then go do it myself.
Yeah.
And in downhill, I don't think you can be like that. You need to really turn off, live life on that edge and really ride that limit. And that's something that I didn't like and I wasn't good at, but also my vision's not good. So ever since I was like a little girl, I've always had glasses and a contact. So I've got 20/20 vision in one eye and plus 4.5, which is pretty terrible in the other. So I always wear a contact and I've been able to get away with it in BMX. I've just learnt my skills and progressed through more feel and through video feedback. But the high speed pace of downhill, I couldn't judge things quick enough that I needed to. So, yeah, I think it was partially vision and partially just, you know, trying to be a little bit more of like that safe athlete, which doesn't flow in downhill.
No.
But I could do that in all these other crankworks and BMX and different mountain bike.
So it's kind of been a positive for you being able to balance the two with the way the progression of the sport's gone towards more of these crankwork style events and like having these bigger kind of four crossy or slalom speed and style. There seems to be more of that style and there's a lot more emphasis on that side of the sport now. Was that quite an easy progression for you then? Were you getting you more stoked on the sport of mountain biking?
I've always been stoked on like the sport of mountain biking. It was always like the fun, and then Olympics for BMX was always the competition. So it was like the competition and politics, and then, you know, the fun and just like my passion was always mountain biking, and that really helped my longevity as well. Now I really see, which I never predicted, that women's free ride movement, so going more of the Utah route, going more of like women's speed and style. We've now got dirt jump competitions. I never really predicted that. And I always thought that, that there wouldn't be too many girls that would want to sign up to it. There's always been your Casey Browns and your couple of females that have wanted to do your best whip. But majority of your athletes have either been, your hardcore downhillers, your enduros, or there's been some versatile athletes like myself and Jill Kittner, which have sort of more pioneered like the pump track and the slaloms and your air downhills. Whereas now I'm really finding with your Geordie Scotts, with myself, with your Via Verbix, starting to take it a little bit more freestyle. So the progression for me actually into that came from pre all my injuries. I saw that there was an opportunity with freestyle BMX coming into this Olympic Games in Tokyo. So my crazy goal back then was I wanted to race BMX and do freestyle at these Olympics. So my backyard in the States at the time, I started learning flares, I started learning backflips, 360s, tuck no-handers, all of that. Went and competed at FEES, went to China, did the World Cup, did the World Championships. And then I had 2.5 years out of the sport with all of my injuries. So that sort of like put an end to that like goal and ambition to want to do both and think a little bit realistic to go, I'm probably only going to qualify for BMX race. But what I've learned in BMX is not going to be wasted. There was then that opportunity that Crankworx was like, we want to do speed and style. We want to have more of these dirt jump events. They became like an FMB, like women's freestyle movement. And I was like, well, maybe this is like my next little like legacy. Like I've achieved all these other goals and lost a bit of passion for other things that, really inspired me 15 years ago. But now at 29, I'm like, okay, I see like an opportunity and already learning so much on the BMX. It's now, I just needed to build that safe setup, which fortunately my boyfriend has a big motorbike airbag. So I've got the 9-foot speed and style exact takeoff in my backyard, which they use at Crankworx. And I've got that set up to a big airbag. So starting now bringing in those combo tricks and this next month it's like flip knacks and 360 like T-bogs and those combinations. I want to get on lock. So that's sort of where I'm at. And motivation wise, that's really the passion. So I train my body for racing for the Olympics and I train my skills for this progression of women's mountain biking.
Is it much of a different, is it kind of harder to go into a more judge style of competition than a racing? Because you've been racing for so long that the clock doesn't lie, right? Whereas a judge can, so.
And we've seen it happen multiple times. You're like, really? Does that weigh up? I think it is a little bit more challenging, but at the same time, it's quite calculated. You can look at obviously what the scorecard is, knowing that my speed is pretty relative to the other girls in slalom. So then knowing what I actually need to achieve, and I'm setting my goals obviously to tricks at the moment that aren't even on the Crankworx scorecard. So I'm hoping when I do come back in that, there is the rest of the world having that progression too. And then, and it's exciting. I wanted to obviously go to the European Crankworx coming up, but with everything going on, risk reward wasn't really worth it right now.
Definitely way more effort than it is for the actual reward of a competition maybe happening.
Yes.
But speaking of like progression and tricks and women in freestyle, it seems like Canberra at the moment's got a pretty good scene up there as well, with like Harriet Burbridge, and then I think Sian's starting to do a bit more dirt jumping and stuff as well. Does that kind of help?
Yeah. Well, my crew's basically like Mike Ross and Harriet. So between that, like we're sort of planning some more trips, like now that Bear Creek in Sydney is obviously opening up. So wanting to go there more often. And then with Green Valley so close and it now becoming summer, so those Threadbow trips back on. It's been really nice. So there's been a lot of trail building happening in Canberra. I lived in California the last 10 years and idolized that country and wanted to sort of be there full time, but COVID brought me back within the last sort of 6 months. And I got home and was like, we always just had Stromlo, whereas now there's Tuggeranong Pines, some really big hits out there, which have been, pretty challenging and scared me. And now there's Majura, so some dirt jumps out there. And then luckily was able to build a setup thanks to my boyfriend in my backyard, which just got a rebuild as well. So it's now a bit more of a step up to replicate those courses, and then it has a dirt landing next to it. So we can shift the ramp and take it from the airbag to the dirt. Has his big mountain bike moto set up next to it, and then a little pit bike track as well. So 30th birthday is coming up, and sounds like we're going to have some fun with all the pit bikes and airbag session.
What is Majura Pines like? Those hits look huge. How is it going through those?
Crazy. So the dirt jumps that have been built at Majura are pretty technical, but it's a public setup, and finally got the support from, the government and the likes of Harriet have really been like hooking in, which is special. And then the Tuggeranong Pines, which they call Terra Nova, it's like downhill through the woods. Those are some big gnarly jumps. And again, they've been approved and they've sort of stuck to the rules of, not having anything dangerous and trimming the trees back and having the right water grading and ticking it all. So the first time I went there, I turned up on my Trek Slash 29er and was like, I need to come back and be a little bit more prepared for these. So reset all my adjustments, took the dropper post off, got my seat lower, ramped up all my suspension to be a bit harder, and came back and got through them. So, they're fun. There's some big jumps.
That touches on another thing as well. Like, I'm not too familiar with BMX racing kind of bike setup or anything like that, but I am with mountain bikes, obviously. Is there anything on your mountain bike that you have to have specifically set up for you to feel like a BMX when you kind of transferred across, or is there something you've transferred from mountain bike to BMX? How's bike set up for you?
Some things are just all over the shop. Pretty consistently, I like having the same pedals across the board. So I run HT clip pedals. It makes it easier with the multiple different shoes and just being able to jump on any bike. Consistently as well, it's like obviously I have my ODI grips, so the cockpit obviously feels really similar. Maxxis tires across the board, which makes it really good too. So when I put in my Maxxis order, it's like I need 20-inch, I need 26, I need 27.5, and I need 29, and they're like, there's your 40 tires for the year. But I'd say I've had to juggle a little bit around. So BMX, you have one brake, it's on my right side. But then mountain biking have always had it the same setup, whereas for freestyle, I take more of my right hand off when I'm like doing tricks. So I actually have my one back brake on the left, so it's out of the way, so I don't grab it. But the setup, I've just sort of adapted to the different bikes and suspension locked out versus not locked out, and brakes on one side versus the other. Sort of initially I was one of those athletes growing up in BMX that if I moved my brake lever like an inch, I couldn't ride. Yeah. Whereas now jump in between. It's like any bike, any wheel size, whatever's going on, just ride it.
Just adapt. Is it true that you don't have a bike sponsor for BMX at the moment?
No.
Is that
more by choice? So
that's what I was wondering.
I ride for Trek, and I kind of initially wanted to convince them to bring back their BMX. But it wasn't on their pipeline, and obviously they're more focused on other cycling disciplines. So I put the question to them and I said, I could get a BMX bike sponsor for the Olympics and have that support, or I could purchase the best carbon fiber bikes on the market and not promote their branding and logo and just support you guys. And they're like, well, we'd prefer that. But, it's in your court. And there's a lot more budget, obviously, in mountain biking and brands that do cross over. So any cycling discipline right now, I think for brands like Trek, they have the option to have road, they have track, they have mountain bike, and they have e-bikes. So there's a lot of financial coming in. In the BMX market, it's so limited. They build BMX bikes. They don't really, there's no brand that does BMX, that does mountain bike, that does e-bikes, doesn't exist. So the budgets are a lot lower in BMX, and I just thought, I want to support one brand and not have to have the headache. And it's really good to go to Trek to say, these are my goals and this is what I want to achieve. And they're like, well, if you want to do BMX, then that's fine. And they got no worries with that.
That's rad. Is that kind of, that would almost like improve your relationship with Trek as well, right?
Yeah, it's refreshing. I had a few years ago, I was with DK and Airborne, and that was basically the same company, and they did do both BMX and mountain bike. So that was still one boss to send my calendar to each year and sort of jump between the two bikes. But yeah, with Trek, I see that more longevity, and they're really interested in, the future as well as Australia, women's mountain biking, as well as just that legacy to bringing the next generation through with kids on balance bikes and everything else. So yeah, they're a really good alignment, as well as Trek being based in Canberra. So
yeah, that's got to help, right?
Yeah.
And I guess over the last, it's been growing for a long time, but over the last kind of couple of years, we've seen a real big expansion into the women's kind of mountain bike scene. Especially like Canberra, you got like Sean and Harriet and a whole bunch of other crew there, and everything. Like the whole country seems to be embracing it a little bit more. Do you have any words on why that is, and how do you feel about the way that the kind of industry is going about getting more women into cycling?
I think it's sort of really good. For me, I see there's so much more potential with the mountain bike future than for a BMX future. Even though it is an Olympic sport. So, I think for me to be an athlete that does both, but to see that future in mountain biking more than the future in BMX, it's exciting. I think that's really been led by some, pioneers in our sports, ones like, your Jared Graves and that have set some big legacies and put in work from the beginning. And I think it's taken a little while for the councils to obviously build more bike parks around the country. And the biggest blessing has been COVID. I think mountain biking's really had such a big blessing. Bikes are sold out, bike parks are being built, and there's that demand. So to go to Stromlo to see hundreds of cars through a pandemic, there's more cars there than there is anywhere else in Canberra at the moment. So that's pretty cool.
It's pretty rad. And what are your thoughts on the way that kind of women get into mountain biking? Like you said, it was your brother that kind of got you into the sport and you had these competitions and stuff. Do you think there's anywhere the market could improve with getting more women on bikes?
I think it's doing a pretty good job. There's obviously some brands like Giant, and they have like Live, there's coaching. There's more coaching support around now that there is like bike parks. I think it's just going to be that natural progression and natural growth. I've always sort of said you can't be what you can't see, but it's always been like a real challenge for me. I couldn't see really a future in BMX when I was younger. It was an Olympic sport. There was no females being called a professional athlete, but I sort of made that my goal to be like, I can't see it, but I want to be it. Now there's a lot of girls that are pioneering that around the world, not only a career, but obviously now multiple cycling disciplines. So the future with social media, with YouTube, with everything at kids' future at their fingertips, they can see it and now they can be it. So it's that natural flow on.
That's a really, really good way to put it. I really like that. That's cool. And so you've obviously had all these positives over the years, like multiple world champion. You've become like one of the best marketed and self-marketing kind of athletes in the world. But in like 2017, 2018, 2019, it seemed like those 3 years were super rough for you because you had that car accident or off-road accident in 2018, was it?
Yeah, it was an off-road buggy vehicle accident out at Miko's farm, who lives in Canberra. So, yeah, basically a friend rolled this off-road buggy down a fire road and I went underneath it. So as it rolled over me, I caught the roll cage and basically went under it and just bench pressed it. So it's luckily that I was quite strong because I was like millimeters from it taking my life. So as the roll cage crushed me, it basically snapped my sternum, which protects all your internal organs. My 2 sternum bones then punctured my heart wall lining and then double punctured and collapsed both my lungs. So my heart was bleeding out into my lungs. My lungs were both fully collapsed and I was on a private property 45 minutes from Cooma with no cell service. So got to Cooma, then obviously had to transfer through to Canberra. It wasn't until I got to Canberra 4 hours later that they put the lung drains in, started draining some of that fluid out, got me into ICU, got me stable, and then spent those 10 days in hospital. So, yeah, it was a pretty gnarly time of my life, just to go through that and sort of to fight. I luckily said to one of my best friends, Kai Hoare, who is a mechanic, is in the mountain bike industry. Yep. He was with me at the time, and he was the one that did like a guided meditation. So he was 45 minutes deep in that car with me, just like in 1, 2, out 1, 2, in 1, 2, out 1, 2. And so those breaths really saved my life, which was pretty gnarly. And then I went through the complications of trying to wait for my sternum to heal initially. No surgeons in Australia wanting to fix it. So it was quite like a dangerous surgery.
Yeah,
Australia's a little bit more conservative. So I actually had to fly to the States and have that surgery done there, which was quite a big out-of-pocket expense. So the first surgery didn't work. So then I snapped the titanium plate in my chest. So they put a HAPE plate. So it was like the bolts down the side, the bolts across to kind of put it back together. That snapped and didn't work. Went back into surgery again. They then tried these 2 rail systems. So they then put like 2 long bars down my chest. But within 4 days, I came out of that surgery and the bolts in the top were backing out. So it kind of sounded like zip ties. As I'd breathe, the bolts would pull in and out.
Sick.
So I was like, okay, I'm going to have to go back into surgery again. So then got another surgeon on board. And between the 2 of them, they worked together as a team, and they're like, we're going to have to cable it, wire it, and then put a different plate system in. This is 3rd time lucky. Yeah. Every time I went into that surgery, you sign a dotted line that says, if anything happens, this is like 50% mortality rate. Mm-hmm. If you get an infection in your sternum, basically that bone near all your organs, like 50% chance you're not going to live. So every time I went in, I just sort of became numb to the fact of going like, I want to be back on my bike. I want to live a healthy future. And we need to get this like fixed. So sign away, go back in, and 3rd time lucky. The 2 surgeons worked together to like pull up my sternum, thread cables between my heart and my sternum. Came back through the existing 20 bolt holes that were there at the time from 2 surgeries not working. Yeah, so like we'll just pick these 2 holes and thread them through, and they basically like cabled it, grommeted it together, and then put an X plate across. So over that next 9 months, pretty restricted to like T-Rex position. Don't lift anything, don't do anything, don't wash your hair, don't lift your arms above your head, don't drive for 2 months. So by that time I hadn't driven for 6 months. And then I was like, all right, I'm going to get through this. And 6 months later, I got that all clear to basically start light training. So started being on a spin bike, started walking more. And at 9 months, I got the full clearance to be able to start moving in the gym and go into those baby weights. So that was about a year and 2 months ago, the other week, that I got that full clearance. And back doing tricks, back taking some big crashes, back riding my airbag, back riding BMX, squatting 140 kilos, deadlifting 140 kilos. So back at the strength level that I need to be to race. And then obviously I've taken those hits. So everything's calcified and everything's formed around all that metal, and it's as strong as it can be. So good to be on the other end of it, because that sucked those 2.5 years.
That's brutal. What, like, I mean, you kind of just, like every other guy that I've ever talked to or interviewed about an injury, everyone just kind of goes, I kind of just broke my back and I was in a wheelchair forever. Or like, it was just happened. But was there a point where you're like under the car because you said it was like 45 minutes or something like that you were under the car?
No. So as it rolled, sorry, my battery's going low. As it rolled, it likely rolled completely over onto 2 wheels again, or 4 wheels again. So it pinched me, but it was all slow motion, like any accident. So I had that time to like kind of go, don't get pinched, bench press, go under, and then, take a bit of load off me. No, it's 45 minutes from the rural property to the Cooma hospital.
Was it how stressful was that? How did you, because it seems like you just kind of, I mean, Kai has a very mesmerizing mustache, but I don't think it would calm me down that much. Like how? Well,
he's always been like a brother to me. He's my absolute best friend. He he taught me to drive when we were doing mountain bike runs when I was like 13 years old, and chucked me in his ute and said, put it in neutral and roll down. Like, you can't get another run. Like, you're helping us out. Yeah. So, taught me to drive from a young age, and just, has been that best friend. So I think in that instance, you go into like survival mode, and he was, a really big help there. But it was like that fight or flight, that survival. I said to him, like, in that moment of like going, I'm not ready to die. Like, I have so much to live for. And he's like, just keep breathing, and managed to keep that stress down, managed to keep that bleeding. My body was already at the max kind of that it could handle the internal bleeding that was happening at the time. And because like my heart had been punctured and all these organs, I was pretty lucky that I was able to stay calm. I'd done some guided meditation in the past. I'd gone on some Buddhist retreats. So fortunately, I knew how to meditate. I knew how to like focus on my breathing and just go into that trance. And I went into that for the 45-minute drive, the hour at Cooma, and then the hour and a half transfer to Canberra before I was obviously put on more of like, the lung drains and got my body stable. So, some pretty gnarly ketamine trips and everything else going on. But, yeah, it was just that choice of going, I have so much more to achieve. And, it reminds me every time that I'm like training now or like think I'm in the deep end, I'm like, look where you've come from. Yeah. Like, this is easy. This shit's easy. You chose to fight, and, that's the strength of the human body.
And I've separated a rib from the sternum before, and that's probably one of the worst things I've ever felt in my life. I can't even fathom the pain of what you've had to go through with a broken sternum.
I pulled 2 ribs off one side from the sternum and then snapped the sternum in half. So, anyone that's had rib pain, you can't cough, you can't sneeze, you can't do anything. So you'd like hug like a pillow. And
yeah, I know that feeling. But also, I guess another thing for me is like pain management. Like, I hate anything like endone or oxy or anything like that. Was it hard for you to manage that kind of aspect of the injury as well, or was that where meditation came in?
Yeah, a little bit, and just more. I've always been a little bit more holistic, but I think like this injury taught me to be more as well. So everything from getting up like early, so watching the sunrise obviously helps you set all of your circadian rhythm. It helps you with your hormones. So to sleep better at night, to have those better hormones throughout the day, also like manage pain as well. So I got up every morning, watched the sunrise at 6:20. I'd have my feet in the earth, so grounding. Yeah. So all this like deep, obviously more like holistic side. But yeah, I didn't believe really in the same thing. I didn't want to be on codeine every day. I didn't want that. So sort of manage that pain, and it also helped with the mental side and mental clarity to get through it too.
Yeah, for sure. And then after that huge physical injury, you went through like a fairly mental and emotional kind of stress through a divorce at the same kind of like at the end of that.
Yeah, just all piled in on one. It was the
You're just like, when's it going to stop? Yeah.
It was very challenging, and I felt like, partially looking back now, the injury really was one of my best friends at the time that was driving the vehicle. I'm now no longer best friends with her. So it was just like dividing moment in my life that injury actually showed me the truths in my ex-husband, showed me the truths in my friend, showed me really just back in line with who I am, my values, what I stand for, and really my goals moving forward. I was pretty distracted. Again, I was living in the States. Like, everything has brought me back to Australia, back to who I am, back to where I want to be, and to now a more healthy, nurturing relationship, and really happy. So, yeah, it's always those like shittest times in your life, and also being quite public with social media as well. Yeah. And we did have that public relationship too, with sponsors and everything linked in together. So, divorces are no fun, but luckily I'm still young and moved on to bigger and better things.
It was just like you've hit the reset button and you're back in the Stargate, and you just seem to have come out stronger than, the end of your last run. It seems really, really cool the way you've kind of come out of it all.
Yeah, I mean, it's a trend. Obviously, history repeats itself, and anyone that's gone through some shit in their life, they're always either better people or stronger for it, or makes them those better athletes. So, yeah, wouldn't recommend it on anyone, but yeah, watch out for buggies.
It's not a life improvement advice coming out here.
Wear a seatbelt, wear a helmet.
Yeah.
Don't be around buggies, basically. Stick to bikes.
They seem fun. I love it, but I definitely don't want to go what you've been through. That's for sure.
No.
We might start wrapping it up a little bit because your battery's going low.
I reckon 5%.
What advice would you give to people that, I guess, want to win races and be where you've been with racing? I guess also diversify their sport and do what you've done, and also want to be a part of social media and be in the media's eyes, because that's the hardest one out of all of them, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But what advice would you give to those people?
Social media, all about authenticity. So obviously, like, be yourself, be consistent with yourself, with your brand messaging, with your sponsors, with your results, with your posts. Consistency is huge. And then I think as well, one of the biggest things that's helped my career is the diversity and the ability to jump between different sports, hit all these different demographics, wider audiences. So to not just be, I think it's really helped too now with, you never know the progression of the sport. Like, what's selling now isn't going to be what's selling in months' time. So yeah, have those options between the different wheel sizes. I had a lot of slack to begin with, so don't listen to people that tell you need to just be and like sit in your box and sit in your lane. Break that box. Don't follow like that mold. That was really what has obviously been one of the biggest parts of my career, which has allowed me to have a successful career on and off the bike. And now post-injury, I didn't lose any sponsors through those 2.5 years. Everyone backed me. All my salary stayed the same, and I think that's, a big part to the relationships that I built initially, and then also knowing that as the sport goes in different directions, I can sort of continue to lead that legacy and go with that too. So that'd be my biggest advice to kids coming through, but also get a really good support network around you. I had some managements that took their 20% and were quite lazy and weren't really invested in me. I then went down another route with an agency, which I invested into. So I'd actually have to pay them 20 hours every month to help. And that was everything from EA to booking flights to helping update my drug testing to data collecting to working with Canberra Airport, Mercedes, like you name it. I got them on board for a few years. It was a big investment, but that really helped. And then now got Two Palms, which is another agency in Australia. So as I said, it's all about the team behind the dream and building that and building those relationships.
Yeah, for sure. Is there anything you would have done differently? Is there anything you would change about the way you've got to where you are?
Getting into mountain biking earlier.
Yeah.
Potentially moving back from the States maybe a little bit earlier, career-wise. You're always going to have those like potential regrets, but I think, maybe not being in that buggy that night. Like, you can always in hindsight, but it's made me who I am today, and I'm back on the start line and I'm loving my life and genuinely more happier than I was winning multiple world titles. So, now finally I think feeling enough. So, I think for a lot of athletes, you can get so caught up in never feeling enough, and one national title is never enough and one world title is never enough. You got to win 8. But it's a real rat race. So, yeah.
And last question I always like to ask, and it seems to be the hardest or the easiest, but when you're kind of feeling a bit average and you don't want to go, say, do a 140 kilo deadlift, or you really don't want to go train or ride or do anything, is there any kind of music or is there anything you listen to, or what kind of practice gets you motivated to get back out there and doing it?
Well, when I'm in the gym or like training, I had a watt bike session in the morning. So I listen to Dave East. I'm hooked on him at the moment. So recommend looking that up. But yeah, I'm more listening to like, your Eminem, your rap. Like, I need this like almost like drug deal streak thing going on in my head. And that is what brings the best out of me when I'm in the gym. But then obviously, like, I love country music and chillers and everything on the side. So I love the downtime too, just as much. Like, I have an infrared sauna, and I love, you know, really completely switching off too. So that's that balance of being a female in a male-dominated sport and going out, you know, or when I say, like, when I'm on that roll in, when I'm, you know, pedaling in to do like a 360 or a backflip or whatever it is, I always say, like, all I need to focus on is what I see in front of me. Bring me back to that moment and just focus on that there. If you put the work in, then the success will come. For sure. That's no better way to end, I guess. Sweet. Thanks so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure. Never thought I'd ever get the opportunity to chat with you and chat about this. So thanks so much for coming on. It's been great. No, it's good. Mountain biking's in a good position. So, yeah, I look forward to everyone getting back between the tape, back racing, and things being normal. Yeah, as normal as they can be, for sure. Easy. Cool. Well, thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll speak soon. Cool. If you want to follow along the journey, Caroline Buchanan on social media, or at cbuchanan68 is my handle. For sure. There's that marketing straight up. You're the only one ever to do that. Perfect. Thank you so much. We'll speak soon. Thanks, guys. Cheers. Bye. Bye.